My father chose his new family over me at 14, 20 years later. His new family chose me over him. I was 34 years old when I watched my father realize, in a single, silent moment, that the version of me he'd spent 20 years controlling no longer belonged to him. It happened in a private dining room in Scottsdale. White tablecloths, amber light, a birthday cake no one had touched, 2 bottles of wine breathing on the sideboard, a waiter pretending not to notice the tension, and a cardboard storage box sitting beside my stepmother's chair like a quiet weapon. My father was at the center of the table, smiling the way men smile when they believe the room still belongs to them. His wife, Colleen, was on his right. My stepbrother Micah sat across from him. My stepsister Tessa was near the end. I was the last person to walk in. When he looked up and saw me, his hand stopped around his water glass. Nobody spoke. Then Colleen said, "Sit down, Elena. We've been waiting." That was the first moment I understood this dinner wasn't about celebration. It was about exposure. It was about exposure. And on the chair beside her sat the thing that would split 20 years of lies straight down the center. A box full of letters. My letters. Before I tell you what happened in that room, I need to take you back to where this began. Because this story did not begin with a birthday dinner, or a confrontation, or a cardboard box full of old envelopes. It began when I was 14 years old, sitting at a kitchen table, listening to my father explain why I was the one who had to leave. Before we go further, like and subscribe if stories like this resonate with you. Not because they are dramatic, because some people know exactly what it feels like to be called strong, when what adults really mean is easy to sacrifice. My mother died when I was 10. Brain aneurysm. One ordinary Tuesday. One phone call. One hospital hallway that smelled like coffee and disinfectant and fear. One doctor with tired eyes and a careful voice. And then the rest of my childhood became a place no one ever fully came back to. My father, Richard, did not fall apart in the obvious way. He kept going to work. He paid bills. He made sure there was food in the refrigerator. He signed school forms. He drove me to dentist appointments. He asked if I had homework. From a distance, he looked functional, responsible even, but the emotional part of him went dark. That is the only way I know how to explain it. The part that used to laugh first. The part that used to crouch down to my height when I was scared. The part that looked at my mother as though she had built the whole world, and he was grateful to live inside it. After she died, something in him closed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just permanently enough that I grew up reaching for a door that no longer opened. For a while, I told myself that surviving with him was enough. I told myself grief was ugly and private and strange. I told myself no one knew how to parent after a death like that. I told myself the version of him I missed would return eventually, if I was patient enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, grateful enough. When you are a child, you will build entire belief systems around a parent's absence if it helps you live through it. I became easy. That was my strategy. Easy to teach, easy to feed, easy to leave alone, easy not to worry about, easy not to choose. Then he met Colleen. She was warm in the way my father had stopped being. She wore soft sweaters and sensible jewelry. She folded napkins even at casual dinners. She smelled like vanilla lotion and clean laundry. She had 2 children from her first marriage. Micah was a year older than me. Tessa was 2 years younger. They were loud in the way children are supposed to be. They interrupted each other. They laughed over each other. They left cups in the sink and socks in the hallway, and took up space like they trusted the world to make room for them. At first, I liked them. That's the part people never expect. They think stories like this begin with instant hatred. They don't. Most of the time, they begin with hope. Hope that maybe if you are pleasant enough, flexible enough, good enough, no one will choose against you. Hope that maybe what is coming is not replacement, but repair. Hope that maybe the universe will not be cruel enough to take one parent and then ask you to audition for the other. For a while, it looked possible. Colleen bought me a teal scarf one Christmas because I had mentioned once that it was my favorite color. Tessa wanted me to braid her hair. Micah showed me how to beat one of the arcade games at the pizza place he liked. There were evenings when all of us sat in the living room with takeout containers in our laps, and I almost believed we were moving towards something survivable. But my father had already begun dividing his life in ways I could not see yet. They were his second chance. I was the reminder of the life that had broken. And reminders are heavy things. Some people carry them. Some people bury them. Some people hand them to a child and call that child mature. There were signs before the day he sent me away. I can see that now. Little things. The way he smiled more easily around them. The way Tessa's scraped knees got gentleness while my quiet sadness got instructions. The way Micah's school struggles became something to solve while my straight-A report cards became proof that I didn't need attention. The way Colleen's family felt like a fresh room he could enter without grief trailing behind him. The way I had become tied to memory, and memory had become something he was tired of carrying. When I was 12, I made it to the regional science fair. He forgot. Not entirely. He remembered in the abstract. He just remembered too late. He called that evening and said he had been meaning to ask how it went. I told him I had won second place. He said, "That's great, kiddo." Then he asked if I had thawed the chicken for dinner. When I was 13, I got sick at school, and the nurse called him first. He didn't pick up. Then she called Colleen because she was listed as an emergency contact. Colleen came within 15 minutes, carried crackers in her purse, and signed me out. When we got home, my father said, "Thanks, honey," to her in the kitchen, and then asked me if I was going to finish the makeup work before dinner. Nothing huge. That's the thing. People imagine abandonment always announces itself like a slammed door. Sometimes it starts as a series of tiny adjustments in which one child becomes more real than another. The summer I turned 14, my father sat me down at the kitchen table in the house I had grown up in. The peaches on the counter were overripe. The ceiling fan clicked every third turn. The window over the sink was open just enough to let hot air in. I remember all of that because when your life splits in half, your body records the room like evidence. He did not look at me at first. He folded a paper napkin once, then again, then flattened it with both hands. Finally, he said, "Colleen's been offered an opportunity in Scottsdale." I said, "Okay." He said, "We're moving before school starts." I said, "Okay." Then he took a breath and added, "Elena, I need you to be mature about this." That was when I knew. No child hears that sentence right before something good. I asked him what he meant. He said the new place was smaller than expected. He said Tessa was still adjusting. He said Micah needed stability. He said Colleen was overwhelmed. He said everybody was under pressure. He said the transition had to be handled carefully. He said it would only be for a while. He said the timing wasn't ideal. He said I'd understand when I was older. Then he said the sentence that has followed me through half my life. They need me more. I remember staring at him because I honestly believed there had to be more after that. An explanation. Arisque. A final sentence that would make the first one less cruel. Some correction that would prove I had misunderstood. There wasn't. He kept talking. He said I could stay with my Aunt Marisol in Tucson for a while. He said I was independent. He said I was strong. He said I had always understood more than most girls my age. He said I wasn't like other teenagers. He said I could handle change better than Tessa could. He said Micah was at a sensitive age. He said Colleen's work schedule would be intense. He said I should not turn a practical decision into emotional drama. Adults love to rename abandonment when they want to survive their own guilt. I asked him, "Are you sending me away?" He rubbed his forehead and said, "Don't make this uglier than it has to be." I stood up so fast my chair scraped hard across the tile. "I'm your daughter," I said. And he answered, "I know. That's why I know you'll handle this." I think that was the moment something in her. Not visibly, not in a way anyone else would have noticed. Just enough to let cold air in. I packed in silence. That is one detail I never forget. I did not scream. I did not throw things. I did not refuse. I folded my own shirts. I wrapped my own photo frame in a towel. I packed the stuffed rabbit my mother had given me when I was 5 and hid it at the bottom of the suitcase because by then I was already embarrassed by needing comfort. I stood in my room and looked at the walls and tried to memorize what belonging used to look like. The next day, Colleen came into my room holding an empty laundry basket. She hesitated in the doorway like someone entering a church after missing too many Sundays. "Your father told me," she said. I nodded. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "I'm sorry this is hard." It was not enough. But at 14, I still wanted grown women to become mothers if I looked lost enough. So I said, "It's okay." It wasn't. Tessa cried when she realized I was actually leaving. She asked if I was mad at her. I told her no. She gave me a friendship bracelet she had half finished and said I could still be her sister if I wanted. Micah hovered in the hallway and said nothing. His silence was not cruel. It was just young. Children are not good at naming systems they are trapped inside. The morning my father drove me to Tucson, he loaded the car like he was moving storage, not a daughter. 2 suitcases, a plastic bin, 1 box of school things, 1 envelope with $100 inside. He talked about traffic the first half hour, gas prices the second. A radio host neither of us liked. He did not mention what he was doing. At one point he asked if I wanted to stop for food. I said no. At another point he said, Marisol's always been good in a pinch. Like I was weather. Like I was a temporary logistical complication. Like someday, if the right conditions returned, he might collect me again. Aunt Marisol lived in Tucson in a duplex with dry grass out front, a metal porch chair that burned your skin in summer, and wind chimes that sounded lonely at night. She worked as a medical receptionist. She never had much money. She had calluses on her hands from doing everything herself. She laughed with her whole face. She could make arroz con pollo from almost nothing. And when my father pulled into her driveway, she understood what was happening before he said a word. She opened the trunk, looked at the luggage, looked at me, then looked at him. You're leaving her here? She asked. He said, just until things settle. She asked, settle for who? He didn't answer that. Of course he didn't. He carried 1 suitcase inside, left the other 2 by the door, pressed the envelope into my hand, told me he would call Sunday. Then he left before dinner. No hug, no promise that sounded real, no final glance from the driveway. Just gravel under the tires and heat coming off the pavement while I stood there with my whole life packed into 3 containers. Marisol put one hand on the back of my neck and steered me inside like she was rescuing a frightened animal. Put the money away, she said, then come help me cut onions. That was how she loved. No speeches, no dramatic pity, just work, food, a place at the table, a way of saying, you are staying alive here, whether you know how or not. That first Sunday, I sat by the kitchen phone 15 minutes early. He didn't call. The next Sunday, he called late. There was noise behind him. Laughter. A television. At one point, I heard Tessa ask if they were leaving for the movies yet. He asked if school was okay. I said yes. He said good. Then he said he had to go. That became the pattern. Late calls. Missed calls. Short calls. Birthdays reduced to text. Christmases reduced to gift cards. The slow administrative translation of a daughter into a logistical inconvenience. Whenever I asked when I was coming home, he would say, let's not use that word right now. Home. As if the problem was my vocabulary. As if loss could be softened by changing nouns. I wrote letters instead. Phone calls gave him too much room to redirect. Letter sat still. They said what they said and did not bend to make adults comfortable. I wrote when I got good grades. I wrote when I made debate finals. I wrote when I needed braces tightened and my mouth hurt for 2 days. I wrote when I had my first panic attack in a school bathroom and didn't yet know that was what it was. I wrote when I got my driver's permit. I wrote when a boy I liked asked another girl to homecoming and I felt stupid for caring. I wrote when I cried in the bathroom and washed my face and went back into the world looking composed. Sometimes he answered with a short card. Sometimes with nothing. Sometimes with a check that showed up weeks too late and covered half of what I needed. Sometimes with a sentence so vague it felt like it had been written for someone else. Marisol never asked me to defend him. She didn't talk about him much in those first years. But she noticed everything. She noticed when I stopped asking whether he had called. She noticed when I stopped checking the mailbox first. She noticed when I pretended holidays didn't matter. She noticed when I started saying your house instead of home, when I spoke about Scottsdale, even by accident. She noticed the way I cleaned too quickly after dinner, how I kept trying to earn my place by making myself useful. She took me school shopping at Goodwill and let me choose one new thing from the clearance rack at Target if we had a little extra. She sat at my choir concerts on folding chairs and clapped like I mattered. She came to debate competitions in scrubs when she had no time to change. She left $5 bills under the sugar jar when she knew I was too proud to ask for money. At night, I could hear her counting bills at the kitchen table. Once I came out for water and saw tears in her eyes. She laughed them off and said onions had gotten to her earlier. There were no onions on the counter. Sometimes the difference between surviving and becoming someone else is one adult who refuses to let you vanish. By 16, I had stopped waiting by the phone. That doesn't mean I stopped hurting. It means hope had become expensive. I got a weekend job at a diner. My sneakers smelled like coffee and fryer grease. I learned how to carry 3 plates at once, how to refill sweet tea before people asked. how to smile without inviting conversation, how to count tips twice, how to hear men call me sweetheart and keep moving. At school, I told people I lived with my aunt because it was better for the transition. That was the polished version. The truth was uglier. My father had not just sent me away. He had turned me into the emotionally convenient child, the one who was supposed to understand why being loved less was somehow proof of character. There were nights in Tucson when the wind was so dry it rattled the window screens. Marisol would leave a glass of water by my bed because I always woke up thirsty. On Sundays, she made extra beans and rice, so I had lunches for school. On report card days, she taped my grades to the refrigerator like they were miracles. No one had ever displayed my effort that way before. It embarrassed me at first. Then it started to heal something I did not know had been broken that long. When I was 17, I found out there had once been a custodial account in my name. My mother had started it before she died. It wasn't enormous. It wasn't the kind of money that changes a family forever. But it was enough that college might have looked different. Enough that I might have stepped into adulthood with less fear. The account was nearly empty. I remember sitting in the guidance counselor's office looking at the statement as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something kinder. There were withdrawals I did not understand. Transfers that had happened while I was still a child. Amounts too large to be accidental and too deliberate to be explained away. I called my father from outside the diner on a break. I asked him why the account was almost gone. He said, "It went toward family expenses." I asked if my mother's money had helped pay for the down payment on the house in Scottsdale. He was silent long enough for me to know before he answered. Then he said, "You benefited from that family being stable." I was standing on wet pavement behind the diner when he said it. Cars moving past. My apron still on. My hair smelling like coffee and onions and fryer oil. And something inside me went cold. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just finished. That was the moment I stopped asking him to explain himself. The next week, Marisol found me sitting on the back step after work staring at nothing. She sat down beside me and said, "What did he take this time?" I laughed once because that was the most accurate question anyone had ever asked. When I told her, she closed her eyes for a second. Then she said, "Listen to me carefully. Some people take because they can. It has nothing to do with what you deserved." That sentence stayed with me. It did not heal anything immediately, but it became a railing I could hold on to later. I went to community college first because it was cheaper. Then I transferred on scholarship. I worked every shift I could. I studied on bus benches, in laundromats, in break rooms that smelled like bleach and microwaved noodles. I wrote papers half asleep and still made them good. I learned what exhaustion tastes like. I learned how to stretch grocery money. I learned that pride and hunger can live in the same body a long time. I did not party. I did not drift. I did not have a soft, exploratory early adulthood full of mistakes and safety nets. I had schedules, bills, work shoes, finals, an old Toyota with a stubborn left turn signal, and a private promise I never said aloud. If nobody was coming back for me, I would become someone worth staying for. I became a licensed therapist. People always imagine there was one shining moment when I suddenly knew. There wasn't. It happened slowly, in repetition. I kept noticing the same kind of girl in different rooms. The overmature one, the careful one, the girl who apologized before asking for help, the girl who defended the adults who had failed her, the girl who said it's okay, really, when her whole body was arranged around the fact that it wasn't. I knew that language before she spoke it, so I built a life around translating it. By 31, I had a private practice and a contract with a youth trauma center in Phoenix. By 32, I bought a small house with one mesquite tree in the yard, morning light in the kitchen, and floors that creaked near the hallway. It was not grand. That made me love it more. Every inch of it felt earned. When Marisol first walked through it, she touched the wall with the flat of her hand and whispered, "You built this. Not alone. Never alone." People romanticize independence because they do not understand the cost of it. I built my life because one woman refused to let me vanish. I built it because every time I had been told I was resilient, what they had really meant was disposable. And I decided, quietly and over years, that if I had to survive being disposable to them, I would become indispensable to myself. I did not think much about my father anymore. That's what I told myself anyway. But grief has strange habits. It doesn't always live in tears. Sometimes it lives in the plate you almost set out on Thanksgiving. Sometimes it lives in how quickly you dismiss praise. Sometimes it lives in the startled way your body reacts when someone older uses a disappointed tone. Sometimes it lives in the private shame of still wanting tenderness from people you already know cannot give it. I had a good life. A real one. Not a revenge fantasy. Not a glittering performance for people who had abandoned me. Just a life. A job that mattered. A home I loved. A woman I was no longer ashamed to be. Then Micah sent the message. It arrived on a Thursday night at 9:14. I almost deleted it. He was not a stranger, but he belonged to that strange category of people who live in your history without living in your present. A name that still has a shape in your mind, even if the life attached to it feels stored behind glass. His message said, "Hey Elena, I know this may be unwelcome. I found something in Dad's storage unit. Actually, several things. I think he lied to all of us. If you're willing, I'd like to talk." I stared at it for a long time. Then I made tea I didn't drink. Then I picked up my phone. Then I set it back down. Then I read the message again. Because peace, when you earn it the hard way, becomes something you guard with both hands. But there are some sentences that do not let you sleep. I think he lied to all of us. We met that Sunday at a coffee shop halfway between Phoenix and Tucson. Micah stood when I walked in. He looked nervous in a sincere way. Not guilty, not performative. Just adult enough to know he was walking into someone else's wound. He said, "Thank you for coming." I said, "You found something." He nodded and slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were copies of letters. My letters. The ones I had written at 15, 16, 17. There was one about debate finals. One about my first scholarship offer. One where I had written, in careful blue ink, "I miss you so much it makes me feel stupid." One where I had written that I got into the graduate program I wanted. One where I had asked whether he thought of me when he passed the cereal I used to eat. None of them had been opened. I looked up at Micah. Then I looked back down. Then I saw there was more in the envelope. A Christmas card from Tessa. A short note from Colleen. A birthday card with a puffy sticker still on the back. An invitation to a family beach trip. A folded paper from Micah when he was a teenager that simply said, "Hope you're okay," also unopened. I said, "What is this?" Micah swallowed and said, "Dad kept them. He told us you wanted nothing to do with us." The room around me blurred for a second. Not from shock, from impact. Pain feels one way when you believe nobody reached for you. It feels worse when you learn they did, and someone made sure you never knew. Micah kept talking. He told me Colleen had tried, at least sometimes, that Tessa had written more than once, that there had been questions over the years. Small ones, quiet ones, moments where stories didn't line up. But every time, my father had an explanation. Elena needs space. Elena doesn't want contact. Elena said terrible things. Elena is better off apart. Elena resents the family. Elena blames us for everything. Elena will just create drama if we push. I said, "He told me your family needed stability, and I was old enough to understand." Micah stared at me for a second, then laughed once. Not because it was funny, because sometimes truth is so ugly it arrives sideways. We talked for 3 hours. He told me about holidays where my name was barely mentioned, about the way my father shut down questions, about the story he had fed them year after year. Not one lie. A system, a whole architecture of lies, each one built to support the next. According to him, I had been angry, unstable, ashamed, too proud to respond, too resentful to reconnect, too difficult to welcome back. According to him, I had chosen distance. Chosen. That word stayed with me. It is powerful when used by the wrong person. It turns someone else's cruelty into your own decision. By the end of the conversation, my coffee was cold and my hands were shaking. Not because my father had lied. Part of me had known that for years. No, what broke something open was this. There had been other people on the other side of the silence. People who had not known I was knocking. A week later, I met Colleen. For 20 years, I had made her the villain because it was easier than admitting how much of the cruelty had come from the parent who was actually mine. If she was the architect, then he could remain weak, passive, misled, less guilty. But when she sat across from me in a diner booth, she did not look like a woman preparing excuses. She looked wrecked. No makeup, swollen eyes, shoulders folded inward as if her clothes suddenly fit differently. She brought the original box, Inside were my letters, her notes, Tessa's cards, a college brochure with my name written across the top in her handwriting, a birthday check that had never been mailed, a folded sheet of notebook paper where Micah, at 16, had written, "Do you still like those sour candies?" I saw them and thought of you. At the very bottom, folded into a brittle packet, were old account statements. The custodial account, my mother's account. Colleen said she had found some of the statements years earlier and confronted Richard once. He claimed I knew. Then he said it was temporary. Then he said she didn't understand the bigger picture. Then he turned the argument back on her. She admitted she had let him. "Why didn't you call me directly?" I asked. That question sat between us for a while. Then she said, "Because I was a coward, and because believing him was easier than breaking my marriage." That answer hurt, but it sounded true. I didn't forgive her. This was not that kind of miracle. But for the first time, I allowed reality to become more complicated. She had failed me. Yes. She had chosen comfort over courage. Yes. She had let a lie live because it preserved her life. But she had not designed the architecture of my abandonment. My father had. After that, everything accelerated. Micah wanted confrontation immediately. Tessa wanted time. Colleen wanted certainty. I wanted distance. Instead, we built a timeline. We copied letters, matched dates, compared postmarks, looked through old email archives, cross-checked account statements, lined up contradictions, turned memory into evidence. There is something strange about watching your own pain become organized. It changes shape. Leshfog. More edges. Less confusion. More structure. The more we assembled, the uglier the truth became. My father had not just neglected me. He had managed me, curated me, edited me out of one family while editing that family out of my mind. He had controlled access, intercepted proof, spent my mother's money, built an entire moral story around my absence. And the longer it lasted, the more everyone else had adjusted their reality around his version of events. At some point, he stopped lying to avoid consequences. He was lying to preserve identity. That is harder to fight. A few days later, Micah called and said my father's 60th birthday dinner was the following Friday. Private room. Steakhouse. Close family only. Colleen wanted me there. Tessa wasn't sure she could handle it. Micah said, "He needs to hear it in the room he thinks still belongs to him." I said no. Then I said no again. Then I sat in my kitchen and looked at the copies of the letters spread across my table. I touched one envelope I had addressed when I was 16. My handwriting, my stamp, my hope, preserved like something dead. And I realized something. I did not want revenge. Not really. What I wanted was accuracy. So I agreed to go. Before we get to that dinner, tell me where you're watching from. Different cities, different countries, same kind of silence in too many families. The night of the dinner, I sat in the parking lot with the engine off for 12 full minutes before I went in. It was not fear in the old sense. Not the fear of a child waiting to be judged. Not exactly. It was something older. The body remembers authority long after the mind stops believing in it. Old hierarchies live in breath, in muscle, in the back of the throat. Some part of me still knew what it meant to enter a room with my father and brace for reality to be assigned around his mood. I watched people go in and out of the restaurant. Valets moving, servers gliding past glass. A couple laughing near the entrance. Normal life, continuing around the edge of what felt, to me, like a cliff. Then my phone buzzed. Micah had texted, "We're with you." That sentence mattered more than he knew. With you. Not sorry. Not trying. Not maybe. With. I took one breath. Then, another. Then I opened the car door and walked in. The private room was exactly the kind of room my father would have loved. Dim enough to feel expensive. Warm enough to flatter everyone. A cake waiting in the corner. Heavy silverware. Good wine. The sort of place designed to turn a man's sense of himself into atmosphere. He was already standing when I entered, glass in hand, mid-conversation, smiling. Then he saw me. His smile stayed in place half a second too long. That's how I knew it was real shock. The face always betrays itself before the mind catches up. "Elena," he said. "That's a surprise." "Happy birthday," I said. Colleen did not smile. She only said, "Sit down." On the chair beside her was the box. Dinner stumbled forward after that. Menus opened and closed. Water got poured. Wine arrived. Nobody touched the bread. The waiter sensed something was wrong and became professionally invisible. My father kept trying to steer the room back toward himself. He asked Micah about work. He asked Tessa about her kids. He asked me whether Tucson was still hot this time of year. I live in Phoenix now, I said. He blinked like he had just discovered a chapter of a book he thought he had already finished. Then he stood to make a toast. He tapped his glass, smiled around the table, lifted his chin slightly in that way he always had when he believed moral authority belonged to him. I just want to say, he began, how grateful I am for my family, the people who stayed, the people who built this life with me, the people who were there. The room went still in that subtle way rooms do before they break. Micah set down his fork. Then he said, then maybe you should explain why Elena couldn't. Silence. Not ordinary silence. The heavy kind. The kind that changes the air in the room. My father looked at him, then at Colleen, then at the box. His voice turned thin. This is not the time. Colleen pulled the box onto the table. Tessa opened it. She took out one envelope, then another, all unopened, she said. Micah picked one up and turned it over so everyone could see my handwriting. My father looked at me, then at the box, then back at Micah. Elena was unstable back then, he said. I was protecting all of you. I laughed. It came out smaller than I expected. Sharper too. Not emotional, just incredulous. Unstable? I said. I was 15. Tessa looked between the envelopes in my face and then at her mother. Micah said, you told us she hated us. You told us she wanted no contact. What is this? Colleen slid one of the old account statements toward the center of the table. And what about this? She asked. He looked down. No answer. I said, my mother left money for me. He used it. For your house. That was the moment the room shifted. Not emotionally. Morally. The thing holding everyone in place finally cracked. Tessa started crying. Not dramatically. Just tears she seemed embarrassed by. Micah sat back and stared at my father like he was watching childhood rearrange itself in real time. Colleen took off her wedding ring and set it on the tablecloth beside the box. No speech. No theater. Just a small circle of gold on white linen. My father looked at her, then at me. Elena, he said, I can explain. And that was when I understood something I wish I had learned much earlier in life. Some explanations arrived too late to matter. I stood up, not quickly, not angrily, just fully. My voice, when I heard it, was calmer than I expected. You didn't choose them because they needed you more, I said. You chose the version of yourself that felt easiest inside that family. You told me I was strong because easy to abandon sounded worse. You told them I wanted distance because the truth would have cost you too much. You stole letters. You stole time. You stole the chance for any of us to decide what we actually meant to each other. He tried to interrupt. I raised one hand. No, you've had 20 years. Nobody moved. I could feel the room listening. Not just the family. The whole room. The waiter outside the door. The air itself. I am not here because I need a place at your table, I said. I built my own. I am here because the lie is over. You do not get to call what you did grief forever. You do not get to call it confusion. And you do not get to call me resilient as a way to avoid calling yourself cruel. I looked at Colleen, then Micah, then Tessa. I lost a father. You lost the truth. At least now both things belong to the right person. Then I picked up my purse. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Micah stood. I'm leaving with Elena, he said. Tessa stood too, eyes wet, jaw tight. Me too. Colleen looked at Richard for a very long time. The kind of look that seems to remove years from a marriage one layer at a time. Then she said, I am done letting you narrate all of us. And she stood. That was the moment his new family chose me over him. Not because I had won, not because I was perfect, not because they owed me. Because once the truth becomes visible, neutrality becomes impossible. We did not become healed in the parking lot. Real life is less cinematic than that. More awkward, more thinner, more expensive. The air outside was cool. The restaurant lights threw yellow pools onto the pavement. Cars passed somewhere beyond the lot. For a few minutes, none of us seemed to know how to speak without the room around us. Tessa hugged me first, brief, shaking. Then she stepped back and said, I used to wonder why you never answered my cards. I never got them. I said. That line hit her harder than anything else that night. Micah apologized 3 different ways. For believing him, for finding me late, for not asking harder questions sooner. I told him late truth was still truth. Colleen asked if I would meet again someday. Not about Richard. About us. I said, someday isn't tonight. She nodded. And to her credit, she didn't ask for more. A week later, Tessa sent me a photo of one of the cards she had written when she was 11. On the back it said, wish you were here. Dad says maybe next summer. That text undid me more than the dinner had. Because children tell the truth until adults teach them how to live inside lies. Before I tell you what happened after that dinner, type enough in the comments if you know the feeling of reaching the point where the truth matters more than the apology. The months afterward were not dramatic. That is important. People assume truth creates instant transformation. Usually, it creates disruption first. Mess, silence, practical rearrangements, conversations that stall halfway through. Grief arriving late in people who thought they had already finished feeling. Colleen separated from my father. Not overnight into some clean legal ending. But enough. Enough that she moved out. Enough that she stopped protecting the structure of his reality. Enough that for the first time in 20 years, he had to live in a world where his story no longer had automatic witnesses. Micah and I met for lunch. Then again. The first time, we stayed with safe subjects. Work. His kids. Phoenix traffic. How hard it was to get good bread in Arizona. The sort of topics adults use when they are building trust over the bones of something awful. The second time, he asked me what Tucson had been like. Not as gossip, as a real question. What was your life? Who was there? What did it cost? No one from that side of the family had ever asked me that. So I told him. I told him about the duplex. About Marisol sewing loose buttons back onto my school shirts. About the envelopes of money by the sugar jar. About the jobs. About the loneliness. About learning how to become excellent because excellence was the only thing that could not be sent back unopened. He listened. Not defensively. Not to fix. Just listened. That mattered more than I expected. His wife turned out to be quietly kind. The kind who asks whether you want tea and remembers how you take it next time. Their son once asked why I wasn't in the old family photo albums if I had existed the whole time. Nobody at the table knew how to answer that without telling the truth. So we told it, carefully, in pieces small enough for a child, but honest enough not to become another lie. Tessa came to my house one Saturday afternoon. She stood under the mesquite tree in my yard and looked around for a while before saying, "This feels peaceful." I almost told her peace is not something I found. It is something I had to build because no one preserved it for me. Instead, I said, "Thank you." Some relationships are not rebuilt with grand gestures. They are rebuilt with tea getting cold on a kitchen table, with small honesty repeated often enough that it stops shaking. My father called several times. At first, I let every call go to voicemail. Then one evening, I answered. He sounded older, not softer, just diminished, like the floor under him had changed, and he was still trying to stand the old way. He said, "I never meant for it to become this. Inton, that final shelter people run to when consequences finally arrive." I said, "It became exactly what your choices made room for." He cried, not dramatically, quietly, like a man hearing his own life described correctly for the first time. He said he didn't know how to be around me after my mother died because I reminded him of her. He said Colleen's family felt easier because they were new and didn't ask him to feel the grief he was trying not to feel. He said that the longer it went on, the harder it became to admit what he had done. So the lies multiplied. Everything he said may even have been true. But true is not the same thing as enough. I told him I was willing to have limited contact under one condition. No rewriting, I said. No minimizing. No asking me to comfort you for what you chose. He asked if I would ever forgive him. I told him forgiveness was not a door he got to knock on whenever guilt became inconvenient. Then I said, "Reconciliation is earned. Biology isn't. We speak a few times a year now. A birthday call sometimes. A holiday check-in if I have the energy. No pretending. No sentimental language about making up for lost time. There is no making up. There is only accuracy and boundaries." The first Thanksgiving I spent with Colleen, Micah, and Tessa felt surreal. I nearly didn't go. Again. Then Micah texted, "No pressure. Just an open chair." That phrase caught somewhere deep. Open chair. Not obligation. Not guilt, not performance, just space. I brought a pecan pie Aunt Marisol taught me to make. Tessa burned the rolls. Micah's children ran through the house in socks. Colleen oversalted the green beans and laughed at herself. Nobody made a speech. Nobody demanded closure. Nobody asked me to bless the past. There was just an open chair, my name on it, and room. If you have always had family as a stable fact, that may sound small. To me, it was enormous. Because what I lost at 14 was not only a father, it was place, witness, the quiet confirmation that you belong somewhere without proving it. And somehow, 20 years later, a piece of that belonging came back. Not through him, around him. That may be the truest form of justice I know. Not watching him suffer, watching his control fail. A few months after the dinner, I opened the box one last time. I sat at my kitchen table in the morning light and read one of the letters I had written when I was 15. The one where I said I felt myself disappearing. Then I read it again as the woman I am now. And I wanted to reach back through time, hold that girl by the face, and tell her this: you are not disappearing. You are being hidden. There is a difference. And hidden things can return to light. If someone made you feel hard to love because they chose convenience over truth, hear me carefully. Their choice was not your value. Their comfort was not your character. And the family you deserve may not always come through the door you were born into. Sometimes it comes late, sometimes ashamed, sometimes carrying proof of what was taken, sometimes through a message from a man who used to belong to your father's second life. But when the truth arrives, let it rearrange the room. Let it show you who protected the lie, who benefited from it, who was too weak to question it, who is willing to face it now. And then choose accordingly, not with vengeance, with clarity, because clarity, more than anger, was what finally broke my father's power. Not one perfect speech, not poetic revenge, not cruelty returned with interest, just evidence, timing, and a room full of people who could no longer pretend not to see. A few weeks ago, my father came to my house for coffee. It was the first time he had ever stood in a kitchen I owned. He looked around the room in that careful way people do when they are trying to absorb the size of the life they nearly missed. The fruit bowl on the counter, the magnets on the fridge, the framed print over the sink, the stack of client notes by my laptop. A life ordinary enough to have once been invisible. A life whole enough that it could no longer be denied. He stood there holding a coffee mug like he wasn't sure he deserved it. At one point he asked, "Can I help with anything?" It was such a simple question, and yet it landed somewhere strange inside me. My father, standing in my kitchen for the first time, asking permission to be useful. I said, "You can set the table." He nodded, opened the wrong cabinet first, then the right one, took out plates, counted them, looked at me, then set them down carefully, one by one, like they might break if he moved too fast. I do not know what happens next. Not fully. That is the truth. Some stories end with a clean emotional ribbon. This one doesn't. My father may never become the man he should have been. Colleen may spend years understanding what cowardice cost. Micah and Tessa may love me and still grieve how late love had to arrive. I may always feel some small ache when I hear the word daughter spoken too casually. I may always know that some losses cannot be repaired, only named correctly and carried more honestly. That is what real repair looks like. Not perfection, not forgetting, not pretending, just truth, named clearly, and then lived with. So yes, my father chose his new family over me when I was 14. And 20 years later, when the truth finally surfaced, his new family chose me over the version of him they had been taught to believe in. Not because I won, because the lie lost. And maybe that is the most honest kind of justice there is. Not the destruction of the person who hurt you. The collapse of the story that protected them. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more. And tell me where you're watching from, and whether truth can rebuild anything once a family has been built on silence.